Welcome to the Master Professional Writing Program roundtable discussion, Writing for Stage and Screen, with our three distinguished panelists here this evening. Michael Price from The Simpsons. Julie Hébert, who's right now writing for Numbers. Who writes for True Blood. I'm Brighde Mullins. I'm the director of the Master Professional Writing Program. And for those of you who are not students at MPW, I think you're all my students, aren't you? Except for Jim. May well be a student soon. So we're a multi-genre, 2-year MFA creative writing program. Before we get started, I have a few announcements. This is our last event of the semester. In the spring, we'll have more panels and readings, and we'll be sending out an email to you guys about those, including poet and novelist Sapphire, who will be here on April 5th. Lance Samantha Chang, director of the Iowa Writers Workshop, will be doing a panel for us called Writers Who Teach, which will be moderated by Nan Cohen. We'll also have some panels on agents and editors and all of that in the spring. Also, next semester, our dramatic writing competition, which is open to MPW students only, will be morphing into a writing for stage and screen competition with teleplays and screenplays, short screenplays and short teleplays. And the faculty advisor for that will be our own Dinah Lenny. And Prince Gomobilis will be the managing director of the festival. So if you have questions, you can go to them. No, we'll be sending out a group email. Tonight's panel discussion is part of our course or survey professional writing class. It's a class in which we started out reading Aristotle's Poetics, and then we went into poetry and fiction and nonfiction, and now here we are, television writers.
Pinnacle.
Bitter end.
It's a class in which we look at connections among the forms. And with that in mind, I've sent around a poem by Robert Bly that takes as its subject the phenomenon of television. Bly writes that, quote, "The detective draws 55 million people into his revolver. The filaments of the soul slowly separate." There's something in Bly's lines that have to do with the fact that television is our great communal form. The electronic fireplace, they once called it. And it seems to me, and to many others, that some of the best dramatic and poetic writing being done these days is on television, and in the very shows that our three writers represent. There's definitely some crossover between theater and teleplay as a form, and that's part of what we'll be exploring in tonight's discussion. We do have biographical notes on tonight's writers that are on the flyers. I won't repeat that information, but just to share some background about each of them. I first met Julie Hébert a decade ago at the Bay Area Playwrights Festival, where I greatly admired her lyric play, which was entitled, great title, "The Knee Desires the Dirt." At the time, Julie was also writing for ER. She's a playwright of profound poetic vision, and her newest play, Tree, is currently running at the Ford Theater in Hollywood. In television, Julie has written and directed for Third Watch, ER, and The West Wing. And currently, she's the co-executive producer for Numbers. Our next panelist is Alexander Wu, who also hails from the world of theater. He's a graduate of the Yale School of Drama. And early on in putting together this panel, I asked Prince Gomobilis if he had any recommendations for playwrights/TV writers. And I was thrilled that he suggested Alex, whose episode of True Blood entitled Sparks Fly Out is my favorite episode of that show. Alex is also a playwright whose plays include In the Sherman Family Wax Museum, and I just want to read you a description of that play. Quote, "An Asian American exchange student moves in with a white Midwestern family and is told not to look in the closet. The result is a frenetic tale of aliens, Ovaltine, and talking pork chops." So Alex is currently a supervising producer on True Blood and was co-producer on the series Sleeper Cell. Michael Price is an Emmy Award-winning writer and producer and has been part of the Simpsons staff for the past 7 years. I first met Michael last year when he was an agile member of our Comedy of Politics panel. That pre-election panel was fascinating and funny. Reminded me of George Carlin's injunction that, quote, if you can make people laugh, there is no moment at which their minds are more open. So with that in mind, the structure of tonight's panel is that I'll ask a few questions to our panelists to kick things off, and then see how the evening proceeds, and we'll have time to take some of your questions. I know some of you have read and viewed their teleplays and might have specific questions. So just as a way to sort of kick things off, I thought I might ask each of you how you started writing for television. What was your path to writing television? Alex, you want to start?
Well, I went to graduate school in playwriting, and as I was telling Nan, I came out with 2 crippling handicaps. One was a huge amount of debt, and the other was an even larger sense of entitlement. So I needed a few years to be humbled. You know, I don't know if it's actually happened, but for a few years I was just writing plays for no other reason than I liked it. It gave me joy to write stage plays. Certainly not for the money, as it turns out. And I think in my case I felt like I sort of bumbled into it. I had a number of friends who had worked in the entertainment industry and had kept bugging me to try it because I might like it, and I never thought I would because playwriting is such a solitary act, and I didn't know if I could play well with others. You know, a number of sort of fortuitous circumstances led to to my getting hired on my first show, and it turned out to be actually really enjoyable and fulfilling. So it worked out really nicely, but a large part of it was dumb luck for me.
When people ask me how they should go about getting into television, I tell them 23 years in the theater. So it worked for me. So I was a playwright and a director for many, many years, and I figured that was going to be my life, and I was completely happy with that life. I wrote and directed a play that was here in Los Angeles, and from that, somebody saw it and hired me to write a film. And I wrote this film called Female Perversions in the mid-'90s, late '90s. Went to Sundance, and we got distribution, so we had this little film. And meanwhile, I was still writing plays and directing plays and doing all of that, and it was kind of a side thing. But I got the bug, and I wrote a second screenplay that I wanted to direct myself. Somebody else had directed that film. And I got hired, let's see, I'm taking a long way around a little bit, let's see. I got hired to write a television movie off of that no one else would take. And my agent was even embarrassed to ask me about it. And, you know, and it was the Mary Kay Letourneau story.
Oh.
You got Mary Kay Letourneau, right?
Yeah.
Yes,
I would have
right.
taken that.
Well, you know, and the reason why I got the job was not because they read my material or anything like that. It's because my husband is 12 years younger than I am. And so they thought I would understand. It was terrible. But, you know, and I was like, well, you know, I really don't understand how a 35-year-old woman wants to sleep with a 12-year-old, but, you know, I'll take the job. So, yes, you know. And that guy that produced that actually was a very smart guy. He was at USA. And he said, no matter what we do, we're going to get the audience because of the subject matter. So we might as well make something that we're proud of, which is sort of the opposite of the way many people think, you know. Many people think you're going to get the audience, so don't even try and don't spend any time or money and stuff. So we actually, you know, I was able to work on that and you know, I found it interesting to try to figure out sort of the socio-political background of this woman and how she came to make that decision. And that ended up being, not through any of my credit from me, a high-ranked show on USA. And from that, I was able to get a bunch of meetings. And what I was trying to do is get backing for this film that I wanted to direct. And I met with John Wells, who is the producer of ER and West Wing and Third Watch. And he's an old theater guy. He'd been at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, he'd been a lighting designer and this kind of thing. And so he read some of my work, and he offered me a job writing for television, but I wanted to direct this movie. And so I turned him down. And then everybody I knew thought I was insane, you know. And I was like, well, I don't really know about television. You know, I've been writing about plays. I don't really know about television. I don't really know about cops in New York City and all this kind of thing. It was for Third Watch. And then he said, well, just try it for 3 months, and we'll pay you $50,000. Never in my entire life had I made that much money in a year. I didn't make half that money in a year, you know. And my daughter was starting private college that very semester, and so I thought, for 3 months I can probably take anything, you know. So I signed up, and that was for Third Watch. And then, like Alex is saying, as soon as I got in the writers' room and started talking with the other writers and working with the other writers, it felt very familiar to me. We're talking about story, we're talking about character, we're responding to each other's work, and it just kind of ignited in a way that felt really satisfying, and so that's how I started.
That's great.
Michael?
Well, first I want to say this poem must be very old because they talk about a show getting 55
55 million viewers.
Those were the days. Anyway, well, you know, Alex, you talked about stumbling. I super stumbled. I grew up as a kid who just grew up in suburban New Jersey, just watching TV all the time. I loved TV. I liked performing. I loved comedy. I loved old comedy movies. And growing up in the New York area, when it was before cable TV, there were about 6 channels, and the 3 network channels and the 3 independent channels, and all they showed all day long were Bugs Bunny and W.C. Fields and Groucho, the Marx Brothers, and Laurel and Hardy and Abbott and Costello. And I just loved all that stuff and just stayed inside. And my brothers used to call me Television Eyes because I loved to watch TV. And thank God, you know, it paid off. But then as I got older, you know, I was interested in performing, and I was a theater major in college, an undergraduate college, and then my life is a series of kicking the can down the road, of not, you know, making choices or, you know, sort of doing things because I just wasn't ready to, in a way, grow up in a way. So I went on to graduate school for theater and trained as a director and MFA in directing. And that's where I first did a little bit of writing. I directed a production of, my thesis production was a production of The Alchemist by Ben Jonson that I ended up writing I had to sort of do a pace job on this incredibly long, you know, Jacobean show, and I had to sort of paste some scenes together. So it was literally that in those days too, like this was before computers, you literally were cutting and pasting, you know, and putting it together that way. And then after that, I had some friends from my undergraduate theater friends who had a small theater company in New Jersey, in Newark, New Jersey, of all places, that they asked me to join, and I joined them, and I directed a lot for them and acted as well. But I also then sort of I didn't realize that I was sort of teaching myself how to write, and that a professor of mine at Tulane had done an adaptation of The Birds by Aristophanes that he updated, and I asked him if I could use his script and sort of freely adapt his script. And this was 1987 or 88, and so I readapted his thing, and I was writing all new scenes, and we made references to, like, Oliver North was big at the time and other things like that. And I was sort of just in a way I was training myself to write. I didn't know it. I thought I was just directing and throw this in as a way to make it work. But again, I had various survival day jobs. I taught high school English, I was a proofreader at a law firm, and it was just sort of like, I'm just still having fun. You know, I was in my early 20s, and it was just a way to sort of have fun, but no eye towards a career, just sort of, this is a great thing to do, and if something happens with it, great. And then what happened was that I also was interested in performing, and I got involved in doing improv sketch comedy with a group in New York City called Gotham City Improv, which is the New York version of the Groundlings out here. They were literally like, the Groundlings sent people to New York and like established a beachhead in New York, and that became Gotham City. And that's the thing where you take classes, you pays people a lot of money to take these classes, but you learn through improv to sort of come up with ideas on the fly, and then go home later that night, and your assignment is to take that funny idea, that funny character that you developed in an improv, and write a monologue for that character, or write a scene for that character. And so through a series of these 4 very expensive classes, you eventually learn how to write sketches. And then you move into a performing company where you're asked to produce sketches, you know, on a weekly basis. And that's what I did. And so I really learned that I really enjoyed writing more than performing. And in terms of making it as a profession, I was sent out, I did tons of auditions in New York City for commercials, every commercial in the world. I didn't get anything, you know, but the writing I really enjoyed. And I moved out here with a friend who, we sort of became writing partners, and we wrote a series of sketches that we linked together in kind of a play about sort of the beginning life and death of a couple, you know, from their first time they meet, when they're dating, when they break up. And we took it out here and played it at various comedy clubs. And again, you know, she was very interested in acting. I was interested in the writing, and again, like, went to Hollywood, and the whole Hollywood thing of like getting out there and auditioning for stuff, and going out and auditioning for TV shows and for pilots. And I'm auditioning, and the guy who was the star of The Paper Chase is sitting next to me, and auditioning against him. I was like, I'm never going to get this job. And driving for an hour to Venice, to this place on Venice Beach to audition for a TV commercial, where the entire audition consisted of. It was for Raisin Bran, and the idea was that they had put more raisins in the Raisin Bran so that you're supposed to be looking at the spoon, and the spoon literally dips down because it has more raisins in it. And so your entire day is like, you drive for an hour, you wait for an hour, and you go in and you go like, goodbye, you know, you didn't get it. Wow. So it became clear that writing was my way. And someone told me something very smart, which was that, you know, if you're an actor, you can maybe have a success, you know, especially in television, and be on a hit show or something, and then that might be all that could be it, you know. But if you establish yourself as a writer and you have success, then you can always move on to the next thing, and that sort of became what I did. So by this point, it was time for me to start really making a living. And out here in LA, you know, again, I did all kind of survival jobs. I drove a taxi cab in Hollywood, up and down the Sunset Strip for like a year and a half. And I finally got an agent through this show I did with my friend, and I finally got one job, which was working on a very low budget sort of rip-off of Saturday Night Live type show that made me my first check, and you know, it wasn't $50,000, but it was all the money in the world to me. And
yeah, blows your mind.
Couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that I was doing what I loved, and again, one thing sort of led to another thing, where a guy on that show had worked on for an animation company, and he goes, for this show on Nickelodeon, and he's like, we need people to write freelance scripts. Come on over and pitch an idea. And I pitched an idea. They hired me to do that, and it just slowly kind of snowballed into getting another job and getting another job, and so that's where it led to.
So it sounds like there's no direct path.
There's no pattern.
There's no path, and also Joseph Campbell says follow your bliss. So it also sounds like there's an element of that for each of you, and that there are real linguistic pleasures attached to writing. That's what you're finding. That's what you're grafting onto these shows that you're working on, and. So one thing we spoke about at dinner was how quickly TV has changed in the past 20 years, and that the shows that were popular in the 80s, and where that transformation started happening, where TV became really high quality. And it does seem as if there's a temperament that's similar between a theater practitioner and a working television writer. So in looking at the trajectory of how television has changed and how your temperaments sort of go in with the shows that you're working on, like one thing I was interested in looking at, the plays that Alex has written, it seems like there's been at least one set in the South.
Yeah.
And there are these dark socio-cultural critiques going on, maybe, but very funny. And then Julie, I know you have an undergraduate degree in biology, and so part of that temperament seems to go into your work on both ER and numbers. And then Michael, with your background in stand-up. So television's a broad spectrum, getting broader every moment. What is it about each of these genres that you bring to them, and what are the challenges inherent in writing for each of the shows that you're currently writing on now? Does that?
Well, a challenge for me, in particular, working on the show that's been on for 20 years, 21 years now, is to find ways to keep it relatively fresh, and work within this amazing thing that was developed, constructed, long ago. Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing through very serendipitous ways. I wasn't there, at the start, but that it created this sort of delivery device of comedy and satire wrapped around this family and characters that represent all strata of society, and so it's been very fun for me to use sort of what I hope to think is my sort of like the concept that I really enjoyed growing up, and Saturday Night Live, and like Monty Python, and those huge influences. Sort of satirical look at the world is a way to sort of bring that kind of stuff to a mainstream comedy show. And The Simpsons is a great place that allows you to, 1 minute it's just a joke about, Homer falling down the stairs, but the next minute it's hopefully, a sly sort of reference to something that's going on, or a cultural or a social thing. So the challenge of that is to sort of try to keep it still fresh in a way that I think we found, hopefully, is a way to sort of continue to make it about what's going on right now, and not make it about what happened 15, 20 years ago, sort of keep it what's going on right now. So we have episodes coming up this year that deal with, I'm trying to think. God, I can't remember, I'm sorry. But hopefully, we've taken in the past. Like one show I wrote a couple years ago was about the presidential election and about the way that the primary process works and things like that, or just try to get sometimes with the way the show is, it's so dense with jokes that it doesn't have to be, you don't have to go to sort of like making a huge statement with the entire episode, but if you can just get one little thing in there. So there was a show that I wrote that had nothing to do with anything except just being stupid and silly, but at the end of it, it was about Cletus, the hillbilly guy, and his kids were being exploited by Krusty, a la the Von Trapp Family Singers in the Sound of Music, and at the moment that Krusty was about to sort of sign into this super duper, onerous contract, their mother, Brandine, flew in on a helicopter, and she was a soldier in the war, and Cletus said to her, "Wasn't my line, but he said to her, Brandine, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Iraq stopping 9/11." So to me, that's the kind of brand of stuff we hopefully get a little thing in there, and it sort of maybe goes under the radar or not, whatever. It's sort of a layer to keep the show alive in that.
Yeah, I thought about that when I watched the episode that you had sent to us, How the Test Was Won,
right?
Which was basically about assessment, and very, very funny, deeply funny, but also deeply of the moment. But one of the montages that you used at the beginning was it had to do with Homer's insurance running out.
Right.
And there were all these flashes of accidents that had happened to him over previous
Over the course of the
episodes.
show.
So it was folding in old episodes and character, but also
Right.
completely of the moment, politically and
Yeah.
So.
Well, the genesis of that episode came from when I was a teacher, because I taught just when that was starting in New Jersey, and they had this thing called the high school assessment test or something, and everything, all of it rode on how the kids did on that test, and we spent like an entire year almost just teaching to the test, and so and funny, that was an idea that I tried to get in. I'd worked a previous show I worked on. It was called What About Joan, starring Joan Cusack. She was a teacher on that show, and I tried to get a story about like that in there, but it didn't work out. So finally, I got a chance to get that out.
I mean, it's a real challenge for you guys to keep it fresh. It takes a year to make an episode, right? You have
It takes about a year from beginning to when it's on TV. Yes, about a year.
Yeah.
So that's why it's hard to be super topical.
Right.
So we sort of do stuff that's sort of based on like cultural things that are going on, or I mean, we have chances throughout the process of production to rewrite. Like there's basically 3 shots. There's the first shot when you write the first draft and it's started to be animated and read, and then about 4 months later we see like a very rough black and white version of it that we have a chance to rewrite, and then we see it one more time about a month before it goes on TV, and you can rewrite maybe about 5% of it. So maybe if anything comes up that's very topical, then it'll come in maybe there. Or sometimes it's very serendipitous. We did a thing. I'm trying to remember. Sometimes we'll do things that are just like we'll put it in, and then suddenly like a thing will happen in the news, and suddenly it's like we were thinking about it. So it's very strange that way sometimes. So,
I want to address something that you had said about television being, kind of much better in recent years, because I think it addresses why it's attractive to people who come from theater. TV is comparatively still a really young medium. It's maybe 60 years old, really. Movies are about 100 years old, and theater is a couple thousand years old. So by comparison, the first even 40 years of it are comparatively pretty primitive. I don't know how many of you grew up watching 70s and 80s TV, but it's really bad. It's really, a lot of it really, not that it's all great now, but, it's, there was a rerun of Simon and Simon on the other night. I just watched it to torture myself, and if you watch something from the 80s, and from a directorial perspective, also a sense of it, it looks really primitive.
Yeah.
You can watch a movie
It's flat.
from the 80s, 70s, 30s, and it can still seem fresh. TV, from even not that long ago, looks totally primitive compared to, something that you would, Breaking Bad, Dexter. It just looked, the way of storytelling, the production values are dramatically different. There's been like a real sea change. Really, only I'd say maybe.
I would sort of say peg it to like The Sopranos.
Yeah,
almost, right?
Exactly.
say about 10, 15
Yeah.
years ago. It's not that
Yeah.
long ago. So that's really exciting. I think
Yeah.
that part is really exciting. And I think a lot of theater writers caught on that television is an ideal medium. It's the only medium for long-form dramatic storytelling.
Yeah.
If you want to tell a story anywhere longer than 3 hours, that's basically where you top out in theater or film. But telling a 12-hour, a 20-hour, 60-hour story, it's really just TV. And there's also an opportunity. Television, I think, can be much more intimate. You're alone at home, you're in your living room, and there's this opportunity. There's great things to do in theater. There's theatricality that you can't do on TV. But
You can, but nobody would watch.
Right. But on TV, there's things that you can explore. And suddenly, as I think writers started getting a hold of that, a grasp of that you can do some really exciting things. And a lot of it is just from watching what other people's like, wow, I didn't know you could do what The Sopranos does. Then you get really excited. Then you start doing, the creative sparks start firing. So that's what makes it really, really exciting. To the other question of how genre, I have no interest in vampires. I never did. The only thing that I can really peg it to, and I don't have any insight information into how I got the job, but my boss is a playwright, and that there was an affinity to other playwrights, was maybe the only connection. But I think in all of our cases, because with almost no exception, we had no genre. None of us have any sort of vampire or horror genre background. This was a great opportunity to tell character stories using a genre framework, and the vampire genre, is loaded. It's like a metaphorical, it's a metaphorical sandbox, which is also a metaphor, I guess. But there's so many. It's a built-in metaphor right there.
Right.
So you can tell.
Before you even
right.
start.
You can tell these great character stories, and that's how we all approach it. Just as a pure character show that and let the genre stuff just take care of itself.
Yeah, and specifically with the episode of Your Sparks Fly Out, which contains flashbacks, which sort of give you insights into the Civil War and that dynamic. I mean, you're grafting a lot of different historical periods and all in service of this character, character, Bill the Vampire. So you're doing a lot. That's a very dense episode.
It's an opportunity to, there's other storylines, but that's essentially his episode, to tell a character piece, but, you have all these tools at your disposal in television that, that you wouldn't necessarily have, in other mediums, and it's so internal. It's such an internal experience that he's going through, and you take advantage of the medium you're using. If this story were to be done on stage, you'd do it another way. If you did it on film, you'd do it a completely different way.
Correct.
And if you did it in novel form, which it exists in novel form, it's also a completely different way of telling that story. So, I think we're just, in recent years, grasping onto what the strengths of TV are and what you can really do. I want to say one other thing. I'm sorry taking up so much time. That I think I learned this past year is that television is kind of unique among forms of dramatic storytelling, at least on our show, that I've noticed, is that the story can actually kind of evolve as it's being told. We see something that happens in the story, and you can feel the story going a certain way, and you can honor that. Which you can't in a movie. It's all written. It's done. You shoot it. But since this is an ongoing story with no end point, if it wants to go a certain way, if you want to see more of a few characters, there's a character in the very early episodes of our show, Lafayette, who is a very minor character and is in fact killed very early on in the books, and because of the performance, really, as much as anything else, you just wanted to be with him. You wanted to see his story, and you can do that. And then suddenly the storyline, he takes on, a bigger story, and because, if something funny is working, you can go that way. Something really, disturbing is you can honor them. That's really kind of unusual and exciting too.
Do you find
That's right.
Do you ever do a thing where, like, you're in episode 6 or something, and then you realize, oh my God, this is great, and then you might go back and put something back in episode 2, or to help set it up, or
Our schedule wasn't
by that point 2 is out the door.
I know that,
Episode 2's been on the air already.
I had a brief experience working with the people who worked on Deadwood, and I can think that show was written sort of stream of consciously.
A little on the fly, much more on the fly.
Right. But I mean, that's what they would do. I think they would film everything almost before it aired, and they would realize in episode 10, this is a great thing, so we'll go back and lay it.
They can edit something in.
They would go back and film the whole scene, and we'll put the scene in episode 3 and help lay in and get this ready for this to be paid off.
We were going to have Regina Corrado here from Deadwood, but she couldn't be here. She's working on that motorcycle gang TV show.
Sons of Anarchy.
Sons of Anarchy.
Yeah.
Right.
But
If you can do that, yeah, if there's the opportunity to,
Yeah.
and it's not, sealed and, sent out, yeah, absolutely.
Do you,
mostly
do you
you
look
don't
at the
have
whole
that
season
chance,
that way?
though.
Do you like you start
Well,
the
you
season
sort of-
knowing
you-
like where you're going?
You
or-
work out
Roughly.
the arc for the season, and then you can go where the heat is.
Mm-hmm.
But you sit in the beginning, and I mean, the shows that I've worked on, you sit in the beginning and you work out the first half of the season,
Yeah.
and then you sit in the middle of the season, you work out the second half.
Yeah.
Because you can't, if you work out the whole, well, we have 22, you guys have 13,
12.
12,
Even that's hard to keep in your head.
Right.
22 seems
yeah. But,
impossible.
well, I know, for ER or something, that we had these boards that were all around the room, and stories were written and kept track of that way, and so the whole room was surrounded. Do you guys do that? You write
No.
on boards and...
Yeah, we do, but I mean, the
Keep it
thing with our show is that every episode is self-contained, so that at the end of the show, everything's back to the way it was, so there's no
Reset. Everything
no
resets.
continuity, except a new character comes along, and that's what's crazy, like Apu had these children who are now older than Maggie,
But you can do that. The rules of the
You
show.
can't do that on
It's
some
weird.
of
People
the
get mad
other
though. People get very upset. The fans get very, very upset about that because we had a show, a great show, I think, that was explaining what happened to Homer and Marge in between the time when they graduated high school and when they got married, which is about 10 years, and it was never covered. And so it turned out that Marge had gone to community college and everything, and it was all because the show came out in 2006 or whatever. We were looking back and saying, well, that means that Bart, or 2008, Bart must have been born in 1998. So then it was all set in the 90s and all these 90s references. Homer had like an NSYNC, a Boyz II Men type
The show
band.
but Homer had been,
Right.
I mean, the show started in 1989,
right?
So Homer had like a Boyz II Men type band, and then he invented grunge rock. He had like a Nirvana type band, and we had all these joke references. And the internet fans they're still mad about that. They cannot get over that. So.
Yeah, that's so
I
great.
had a question too in terms of audience. And
Oh, I wanted to
your-
talk about challenge,
But
though.
yeah, and I wanted
and-
to ask you, Julie, because you've been working, you worked on ER for a number of years.
Yeah,
and
3.
2 long-running shows with scientific and, very wieldy subject matter. And I just wanted to ask how that has worked for you in terms of...
Oh, well,
how
I
that
love
fits with
science.
your
It's like a hobby, because I had the undergraduate degree, which I did nothing with except traded. I taught 5-year-old science in exchange for my daughter's tuition at one point. That was the extent of my science career. But I love it, and so I keep up with reading things that interest me, and what I love about it is just kind of understand life, and it's a source of incredible metaphors for writing. So I think that, I mean, for ER we had doctors who wrote the medical stuff, but I like writing stories because what I really like about writing about science is for people not to feel intimidated by it. For like I could write a story about some quantum physics thing that my mother could understand, and we could write it in such a way so that people don't feel that it's beyond them, but they in fact can understand the world around them, can understand the world right outside their window, or at the hospital, or whatever, the mathematics as it might be on numbers. But that's kind of a hard thing to do, and I love doing that. One of the reason why I got this job on numbers, somebody had written a script or tried to write a script and hated writing the math. Hated it and quit and went back to New York and was like, this show's screwed up and I don't like it, and what are you talking about math, And so there was an opening, and I was like, I don't know anything about math, but I'd like to, and so that was part of that. But that kind of ties into what I was going to say about to answer your question about the biggest challenges writing for television, writing for the shows that I've written on, is to turn the math or the science or the socio-political message or critique or whatever into action. Because you don't, like in a play, you can talk about things, you can expound on things. But in a television genre, there's a template, and there's commercial breaks, and there's so the writing is very efficient. So you can't just sort of stand around and have people talk about what they think. It has to be constructed into the action of the story. has to be built into the structure. And I think that's a much harder thing to do. And so in a way, I think that working in television, which you were saying at dinner, it's made me a better playwright, because it's caused me to understand or to be able to intuit structure better. Whereas before I was writing in a sort of swamp of words to try to find what I meant. And because television happens so quickly, and you have to write the outline and write the, at least it is for us, but I'm sure you still probably have a short period of time to write your script.
Yes, yeah.
And so there's two things about that I think are it's the reason why you need writers in a room, is because it happens so quickly. I don't think we can do our best work that fast all the time. So we really need each other. If I write this thing down and I think I've said something and you read it and go, I don't understand that, and oh, here's what I meant, and then together, and it's not that you've taken anything away from my authorship, but it helps the process speed along so that we're acting as an audience for one another and what's coming across. And so that's part of what's very important about having a writing room and having other writers is to get something of any kind of depth whatsoever in that amount of speedy time. But also, I mean, it's the biggest thing to me. It's the biggest lesson of the last 10 years is to put the story and the message in action. And in Art of Reckoning, the numbers episode that I gave you guys, I'm a big fan of Lewis Thomas, who is he's dead now, but he was a wonderful science writer, and he wrote about tit for tat, and I just loved this idea, because I like anything that I can hold on to, like a little idea, and then I can gauge my whole life by it. And so this is tit for tat. They did this huge experiment to figure out what was the most effective way to deal with the prisoner's dilemma. When you're in a situation, what's the most effective way? And they did hundreds of runs of computer simulations all over the world. It was a contest, and the most effective strategy was tit for tat. And what that means is that the first thing you do in any kind of relationship with anybody is cooperative, and after that, all you do is mimic what they do. So if they're cooperative, you're cooperative, and we're cooperative forever. But if I'm cooperative and then you're aggressive, then I'm going to be aggressive. And you're going to be aggressive, and we're there. But if you become cooperative, I will forgive you and become cooperative again. It's like it doesn't hold grudges. Wow. And it's almost counterintuitive to the human nature. Right. And so I read this from Lewis Thomas in the 70s or 80s, maybe the 80s probably. And then when they hired me on numbers, I spent like the first year trying to figure out how I could get tit for tat into an episode that was not just somebody talking about the mathematics of it, but that it was this FBI agent and this murderer, and and so they could do tit for tat across the whole episode. And then I found out, which this is also true. This was goofy, but there's also a thing called tit for two tats. So if you get really stuck, you can sort of jump in and chase it. So anyway, so we built that. But so those are the challenges I think for me, is to figure out because the template is so strong, you can skate. Mm-hmm. In a procedural show, you can sort of get away with not making it about anything. Mm-hmm. If you wanted to, you can kind of do that. Our showrunner came on a couple of years ago, and he had never been a showrunner before.
Can you tell us what a showrunner is, for those of us who don't know?
It's the guy who runs the show. Or the woman. It's the head writer, basically, is the showrunner in television. And he came on having never been in that leadership position before, and basically said, what do you want to write about? I want you to write, like, what have you always wanted to write about that no one would ever let you write about? And so that inspired everybody to try to have their passion in that way. CBS only told me once that I couldn't write about something that I wanted to write about extraordinary rendition, like 3 years ago when it was happening, the Black Ops and all that stuff, and they were dink.
But the showrunner would have let you?
Oh yeah, we wrote the whole. I wrote the outline. We have a whole plot. We had the whole story.
You could turn it into a play, though.
I could.
Don't say
I
that
have
there.
it.
No one doesn't stop that play.
Maybe not with Don and Charlie, but
But in terms of the setup of the writer's room and all of that, do you guys know what that is? Do most of you know what that means? Alex, can you talk about the writer's room at True Blood?
Yeah, it's very different, you know,
Yeah. Is it different for each
from one show to another. It's like for those of you who've done plays.
We
yes,
watch
like-
30 Rock, so we have seen that writer's room.
and that's
Just like that.
that's one type, you know.
Wow. It's very wacky. The
But it can be as different. It's like you're asking, like,
Slogan on it.
you know, if
But it's
what
something
happens
that
what happens
most-
in a rehearsal? Well, it depends how the director wants to run it. I mean,
But
it could
there are rehearsals. There is this thing called rehearsal,
Right.
and it's something that
Yeah.
does make TV writing very different from playwriting. I mean,
Absolutely.
You don't have.
But I think comedy rooms are very different than drama rooms.
Dramas, yeah.
Very different cultures, right?
At
Right.
what point in the process is the writer's room always part of the process?
depends.
I think it
Depends on
depends.
the
I
one.
mean, our show is very sitcom in general is room written.
Yeah.
And there are some shows, for instance, I believe my class this past summer had a friend of mine who works on 2.5 Men, and that show is all written at the table. Like there's not even a draft written. Like usually on our show, you come up with an idea, a story, you pitch the story. We have in fact, I'm having one on Thursday, like story pitch day, where you come up and pitch your stories out, and hopefully the showrunner says, "Oh, that sounds good. Do that." And then you get to write an outline, get notes, then you write a first draft, and then the first draft is turned over to the staff, and again the showrunner will write notes all over the script, and then we begin the process of which is called tabling it, which is basically everyone sits around the table and we go through it very methodically from page one. Okay, this joke needs to be better, and everyone in the room pitches. And so you sit around the room and you go, okay, everyone just literally just no one
What if
says
Homer
no one
says
says
this?
how what if Homer says this. Everyone just says it. You
Yeah.
just say it. And for me, it helped. That's sort of where my acting.
Yeah, for a guy with an
I-
improv comedy background,
I will
that's
sort of
great.
do it
Yeah.
like I will sort of. It helps to do it in the.
Do the voice.
Try to be the character, so you're Homer for a minute, and then you're Bart, and then you're Mr. Burns, and you just pitch it, and then you just pitch, and for like 20 pitches, one thing will get in, and you move on, and you have to be very selfless in that way. It's a combination of having to be incredibly egotistical to think that you have the stuff that is worthy to be on The Simpsons or on network TV, but also very selfless to know that like 90% of it is never going to be seen anybody. It's going to be horrible. It's not going to be funny, whatever. And that's how it's. And we just go through the script very, very slowly that way. And that's.
How many people are in this room?
Our room. Well, our staff is large by sitcom standards now, because the show's been out so long and people are sort of, I don't know. We have about 15 or 16 writers on staff. But usually the average sitcom staff now is around 7 or 8. And but we have 2 rooms, so like each room will have around 6 or 7 people in it. But some shows are written just at the table. They begin like there's no first draft, and they go, okay, I guess the story is agreed on what the story is, and you just start with a blank
Because I think
computer
with,
screen and you
with
start
2.5
writing, yeah.
Men, they just say, we're going to put your name on the first script, my name on the
That's
second
right,
script, your
yeah.
name on the third
Yeah.
script.
There's
And
no
they-
correlation.
And there's no correlation between whose name is on the
Right.
show and
It,
who's
it
written
could be based on whose idea it was, maybe. I wasn't there, but apparently on Friends back in the old days, they would write the script all together, and at the end of that process, they would pick names out of a hat, and whoever got the name picked out of the hat, okay, this is script by you, and then let's say that turned into be like an amazing one of the great episodes of Friends, whatever, the one where Ross ran after Rachel. That was awful. But people got huge development deals and stuff based on
names
those
going
scripts
out
that the name was pulled out of the hat. I mean, Friends was such a hot show that everybody got deals off for that show. But there were like even the writers' assistants were thrown into that as well. So because when your name is on the script, you get paid the script fee, which these days for a half hour is around $20,000. And you also get all residuals. So, like, to get your name pulled out of that hat was pretty good.
Pretty valuable.
And then people did get giant, big development deals based on scripts that they had written.
We don't pull names out of the hat.
Well, let me ask you that. Is that? I mean, are you guys rewritten a lot? I mean, or how does that work? Or do you rewrite together, or or?
Well, our show is different. Because on ER and whatnot, West Wing and Third Watch, there was a writer's room, and the younger or the newer writers would put in a draft, and then they would get rewritten, and then the more senior writers would not get rewritten so much. But on our show Numbers Now, we don't have a writer's room, so we work individually, and then very rarely will some of the senior writers have to take one of the junior writers' scripts and rewrite. It's very rare.
Like just
but
give
it
you
happens.
notes or something? Or?
Mostly we just do notes.
Yeah.
And then and you give them back, and we've done it even with the junior writers. The showrunner will give notes, or he'll assign one of the senior producers to sort of shepherd a script, and then you give notes. And you give notes as long as possible because you don't want to do the rewrite. You want them to do the rewrite.
Right.
It's much better for everybody. But sometimes, there's been cases where younger writers' scripts will just keep getting worse instead of keep getting better, because they've lost the touch of what they really cared about. They've gotten nervous now. And then you have to do rewrites, one of the senior writers.
So this is a sense of how, and then I'll give you a sense of what my situation is. The one we don't have here is someone from a show that's where it's a highly abusive environment, where you're demeaned constantly, and you spend weeks slaving away at a script, and then it's just completely rewritten from page one, and the showrunner puts his name on that.
But it also be rewritten by 4 different people over a weekend.
Yeah. Right.
And then you've really got
and this happens. These are the
yes, it happens. They
I
call
think
it
there was a show where people
gangbang
like,
script, and it's like 4 or 5 people writing a script
You
really
take that
quickly.
scene, you take these 2
And
scenes.
they just hate the script, but they've got to turn something in a few days, and so it gets rewritten really fast. And then you've got to, or somebody's got to go on the set and produce that thing, which is this monster.
You have to stand by it.
Half of it doesn't make, it's like inconsistent continuity. And,
well, in sitcom world, I mean, often it hasn't happened on Simpsons very much, but like you have your day when you read the script with the actors and the network is there and the studio is there and everybody's there, and then sometimes like the script will be thrown out, like the table draft, whatever, just bombed or read so badly. It's like, okay, we're starting from scratch, but we need a whole new script by tomorrow morning because the actors have to start. We're gonna tape something on Friday.
We're gonna keep the schedule.
So, because you have to Friday night you have to tape it for the audience or whatever. So that is what happens. We break a whole new story right there in the room. Okay, you go write scene 1, you write scene 2, you write scene 3. Everybody come back in an hour, and we've got this Frankenstein monster script, and that's happened a couple times on other shows like that. And then you somehow, by the end of the week, something comes out. But hopefully,
it's usually not one of the more resonant shows.
It's just a thumbnail of our show. We're essentially telling a 12-hour story, making one giant 12-hour movie. So we get together as a group, and it's a small group. There's 4 of us and Alan, so there's 5 writers.
It's a small group.
It's a very small. That's 12 episodes, and we plot out the entire season in detail towards the beginning, rougher and rougher and rougher as we get, because it inevitably changes.
Right.
We find something, it evolves, the story evolves, but we have some endpoint that we think we're going to get to, and we'll have the first 5 episodes, plotted out in detail. That's what we do together. Then Alan will ask us which episode do you want, and there's usually very little haggling over it. We each get one episode. We go off, and if the schedule is working nicely, you have a nice chunk of time, maybe 3-4 weeks, maybe even longer to put it together. Come back with the first draft, and then it's actually extremely egalitarian. We all give each other notes, which is unusual. Usually it's just that when you turn your first draft, you sit there with the showrunner and you get the showrunner's notes, and then you go off and rewrite it. Or they'll say, thank you very much, and we'll, and rewrite it themselves. Here, everybody gets a lick in. And you go off and write a second draft, hand that in, And then in the specific case of Alan Ball, I've never been rewritten less than he is very, very light with his touch. So it does a couple things. It affords you a greater sense of ownership over what you wrote. And confers more responsibility over it. You really gotta write. And I'm not writing as me. I gotta write as the show.
Right.
If I can't just go with my own voice into this because it doesn't fit. Whatever you have to sort of be in line with what the rest of the show is. So that's our process as a group of writers. Then that hat comes off, and then you become the producer of the episode. And then there's prep, and then shooting, and then editing it, which are three completely different phases that exercise a totally different part of your brain.
But it's also kind of a rewrite, each one. I mean, you rewrite while there's a certain element of rewriting when you're producing, adjusting according to locations, adjusting to what actor you have, or or that in my case, I always write like these big budget shows that I've got to bring the budget down on, so different things, and then in post, in editing, you rewrite again, yeah.
Well, this seems like a natural pause to open up to questions from the audience, if anyone has questions brewing. But this finding out about the writer wearing the hat of the producer is really interesting, because that's something that's not going to happen usually in theater, although a lot of playwrights come from acting backgrounds or have directed their own work. But that whole idea of the producer, what does that mean? To produce, to be the executive producer or to produce the show?
Well, you don't have to worry about it for the first few years.
Yeah, well, in the sitcom world, you'll see, like, when you watch any show, there's tons of people who are listed as this kind of producer and that kind of producer. I'm a co-executive. It usually means that you're a writer who has been around long enough to get this title. It really does.
There's a hierarchy.
It is a hierarchy based on
like army ranks. It really is.
It's based on like my first job. It was called the staff writer. Which has like a technical aspect to it. But then suddenly the next job, guess what? I'm a story editor. And then now you're executive story editor, and now you're improvising producer. And it's really literally just a thing that your agent gets you, at least in my experience, that's what it was. But when you watch a show, usually when the show ends and the credit comes up and it says executive producer on The Simpsons, executive producer Al Jean or executive producer Alan Ball, whatever, that is the showrunner. That is the person who is really the executive producer of the show, and everyone else is usually a writer who has a producer credit. Because I have background in directing, I occasionally direct voice actors to voice records and everything like that. But most of us, at least in our show, in most sitcoms, the producers are all just writers that are called producers as well. It's a kind of a game.
That's true enough.
Yeah. But there is, after a couple of years, if you have this title and you're asked to produce the episode,
right,
as opposed to just being a producer,
That's different.
right? Because it could be a vanity title too. It could be an actor who in their deal wants to be.
Or the actor's manager. Sometimes
Yeah, they want to be
executive producer.
But when you actually produce your show, then you're there
project
in
manager.
prep. You're in every meeting, and they're saying like, can we use this location instead of having a lonely road where the car crashes through brush? Can the car crash on the street because of and can you rewrite that kind of way? What kind of costume does this person have? So you're making. When you write the script as a blueprint,
So you're sort of like a designer as well.
no, there's designers, but you are collaborating with the designer. You're collaborating with the director. You're continuing to define the vision and to sort of hold on to it and say no, it has to be going through the brush because the car is going to whatever reason you have. So that's all through prep where you go through that and you get closer. I mean, there's the concept meeting is the first big meeting, and then I think this is fairly typical for dramas. I don't know if it is for sitcoms, but concept meeting is what they call it when everybody sits in the room. not the actors, but all the people working on the show, which might be 40 people. And you go through the script and go, scene 1, we're going to need, 7 pairs of X-ray vision glasses or whatever you're going to need. And you go through that way. You have your meetings, you figure out your design issues, you go on location scouts, you look at 5 different hotels, you pick this hotel, and then you rewrite for that, and you go through that. Then there's a production meeting, and the production meeting happens usually about 5 days later. And now all the departments have started building, they've started getting costumes, they've started getting wigs, whatever they need, all the different departments. And so everybody reports. You go through the script again, and you go scene by scene, and now people have much more specific questions. The budgets come in, it's over budget, you've got to get rid of, you can only have 2 sets of X-ray vision glasses, or whatever it might be. And so you go through it again there. And then the final traditional meeting is a tone meeting. And the tone meeting, it's different on different shows. The tone meetings on West Wing would last for about 8 hours over 2 days. Everything on West Wing lasted a long time. The tone meeting on our show now lasts about an hour and a half. And that's usually the showrunner talking to the director with a couple of the other, the writer, producer, other sort of critical players in the room to say, the tone of the show and what we mean by this is we don't want, don't make this corny. Have them throw this away. Or this actor always was going to want to improv, please don't let them improv. Or whatever those things are, no offense.
Sure.
So that's sort of the structure, but you do that. And so the writer-producer is part of all of that and is carrying the story all along. And then you start shooting. And I think in your case as well as ours, the writer-producer is on the set for every minute that you're shooting. So you're there for rehearsals, you're there to answer the actors' questions, you're there to say, no, this is actually supposed to be day, not night, or whatever. It could be big things and small things,
And I think we can see how it would take confidence to get to the point where you have that.
Well, you have to be able to stand up in front of 100 people and go, no, not that.
Yeah.
Right.
It's a really different
It's
set
scary.
of skills than writing, alone
right,
in your
yes.
in your room. It's also dramatically different from feature films, where it's the director's medium, and if you're
invited.
Right, if you're invited, or if they send you a DVD, you're lucky. The thing you wrote.
The Writers Guild had to threaten to go on strike 6 years ago to be invited to the premiere or something like
Yes,
that.
that's right. That
Yeah.
was one of
That was one of the things. We have won these concessions. The writer will be invited to the premiere.
In television, the showrunner is the head writer, and also, when you're producing your episode, as the producer of the episode, you are the artistic head of the production on that particular day,
You can stop
not
the director from
director.
doing something. You can override
Yeah.
the director. I mean, you don't want to. You try to collaborate.
And
So in that way,
That's really dramatic.
so in that way, like you say on TV, is close to theater in that way. I mean, that the writer is respected.
More of a writer's
that
medium
way.
than feature film.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
although I think it is much more traditional in the theater culture that you don't change the words. I mean, we've
Right.
got in a playwright's contract, nobody can change the words without our permission, and certainly that's not true. That's the culture in some shows is that the actors will say those words, but the culture in a lot of shows is that the actors are going to.
Like helpful suggestions.
Helpful suggestions.
The
They're gonna
script is
change
just
that,
a
or-
series of helpful suggestions. Some
Yeah,
people feel
so
like
it depends
saying
on
that.
Yeah, a guy once told me that if you create a show for the first season, it's your show. But then if you have a second season, which means that it's a hit, then it's not your show anymore. It's the actor's show, and that's when the actors start asserting
Well,
themselves.
they gain a lot of
Yeah,
power.
yeah.
They gain because
Like-
they're the visible face of it, and the
Right.
audience doesn't know us. The audience knows, Rob Morrow.
So
Yeah, we want to hear
have there
what you
been
have to say.
questions brewing? Yes, Christiana.
I had a question. It's kind of sad, but it's
Sad?
I remember from Michael's class we had several guests who said that the average career span of a TV show writer is fairly short, and it's very competitive, and because there's only like 5 writers per show. And I wanted to ask you about today when so many shows are now on the internet and reality TV is taking over. How is it looking like for someone who wants to be a show writer?
I'm going to be available in February.
It
Yeah.
seems to me that there's certainly more scripted stuff like than 20 years ago because there's just more
Channels.
There's more channels and there's so
Cable.
much, and the reality can only do so much. The cable, I mean, it seemed like.
Well, I mean,
you know,
the Jay Leno situation
yeah,
took away 5
Right,
hours
that's
of
right.
dramatic television this season. And so that's 5 hours every night. You know, he's on at 10 o'clock. And so before there were 5 hour-long dramas. If each of those shows has 150 people working on, that's 5 times 150 people that are out of work. And if each show had, 8 writers on it,
yeah.
that's like 40 writers' positions that went away. So, so I think what's happening is that there's a great maw that always needs content, and so there's always going to be a need for people to write stories on the internet or cable or all these things. But what's happening, the shift that I think is happening, is the well-paid network writers are going away, and the lower-paid positions are mushrooming. And I think that that's the shift that's happening, and I think the corporations who run it all are happy that that shift is happening, and they're contented with that, and so they're not doing anything to slow that down or stop that. So I think there will continue to be jobs, but there won't be the cushy jobs as there has been in the past. Will start going away.
Dinah?
Hi, thank you. Thank you so much for this. Hi.
Hi, good.
Nice to see you.
You too.
I should just say that Dinah played Nurse Shirley
On
on
ER.
ER for a number of years.
I just was so interested in what you said about, thank you. Interested in what you said about the work, the writing of television informing your playwriting, and then Alex, you said that television is so great now, and I wondered about, and we seem to be not reading audiences for the theater. And I wondered how you feel about that, whether you think it can all be done now in television, and have we, in fact, rendered theater obsolete?
No, absolutely not. Oh, no, I do not think it can all be done until, absolutely not. Because it's like you're saying, his voice, he can't put his voice,
there's things
his great
theatricality that you can't
specific
do.
Alex voice cannot fit into
So how do you
Alan Ball's television show.
How do you
No, I do.
as television writers and playwrights, how can you continue to build an audience for theater is what I'm really asking. How can we as a culture?
I don't know the answer to that because it seems parallel to me. It doesn't seem that television can help a theater audience grow. I don't understand how that.
Well, what
could
I'm really
happen.
concerned about is that people are so now invested in screen life that they don't know how to be an audience in the theater, and that's what I'm really asking about. Are we in some
I mean, I
way
think,
leading-
Walter Benjamin from the 30s, he was a German writer, and he talked about the difference between movies and paintings, being that paintings have a soul because you're in the presence of the actual artwork, and that movies have a distance. And I think of theater and television, theater and movies in that way, that theater you are in the presence of a living soul. And that's just a different experience than whatever fantastic, beautiful thing you can put on a movie or on a television screen. And you can do a lot, but there is something that's so primal about being in the room where another being is acting out the story and right in front of you. There's something about that has a level of excitement that can't be duplicated by film, television, video, internet.
There's something magical and metaphorical that's still going to be in the domain of live performance. And I don't think one is at the expense of the other. I hope not. I really hope not. There's still things that you can do in theater that you can't do anywhere. I just wrote a play about magicians, and it had to be theater, because magic on screen is never good.
But you can do anything.
Yeah, it's never
Pulling
amazing.
a rabbit out of a hat is not amazing
It's
in a movie.
never amazing. But if I suddenly opened up this bottle and pulled a live rabbit out of here, you would be amazed. Whereas the most extraordinary illusions on screen are not that, the two movies.
You don't trust them.
The Illusionist and The Prestige, which are actually not
Yeah.
terrible movies.
Right.
But the magic wasn't magical. He was like, oh, well, Jessica Biel was, on the green screen, and, it looks like she just materialized. Oh, that's not impressive. If I can make Jessica
We've seen
Biel
Star
appear
Trek.
right here, that's really impressive.
But even with Midsummer Night's Dream, when Bottom wakes up and he has an ass's head because the whole audience is participating in a different
Yeah.
way. I went to see
Completely.
Julie's play a couple of weeks ago with Prince, and it's still up. It's up for another 2 weeks at the Ford, and we have some flyers up around the department. And that seems to me to speak to this difference that you're talking about, Dinah, because the play is so lyrical, and it's
language.
it's
It's language heavy.
dense.
Yeah.
And I think television's a listening medium, but theater is also very much so a listening, and you're participating with the actors in a different way.
TV's still the domain. It's still pretty literal.
Yeah.
It's still pretty literal in narrative.
But it is a literal society, that's what.
That's true. Yeah.
I hope not all of us. I hope not all of us are literal.
Hi, I actually have a question about structure. For a class that I was taking, I was wondering if there's a difference now between writing for cable television and writing for network television. In the course that I was taking, I was told that often for television you're writing for the commercial for the next advertisement. And I thought that was kind of...
For the next advertising. You mean for
Well,
the
that's
act
the
break?
act break,
You mean the
yeah.
act break?
Well, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
So I'm wondering...
Well, it's so interesting about the structure because people come in, people say it's going to take you. When I came in as a playwright, and people say it's going to take you, the 7-act structure, the 5-act structure, the 3-act structure. It's going to take you, and it's like my friend wrote down. I can write it down for you guys in a paragraph, and you could do it. It's not difficult because all it means is it's like where you're going to take a breath in the story. So I don't think that you're writing for the break. I think that you're organizing your structure into 5 parts or 3 parts or something like that. And so, it's interesting because I watched something. It's like ABC has 3-minute acts or something. I mean, they've got like really short. They've got like 7 acts or something like that. I don't
We
know.
have 4 acts now.
We have
since
four,
they
we
added an
have we have a
extra-
teaser and 3
they added an
acts.
extra
Yeah.
commercial.
And they tried it with 5 acts before, so they adjust this all the time and they're concerned about the commercials. But when we're writing it, it's intuitive now. I'm not even thinking about I think about what would be a good sort of cliffhanger, at one of those places. But we make choices like some of the act breaks are about character, some of the act breaks are about the plot, and so you can, it's almost separated from content,
Your show in like Sopranos, there's no commercial breaks, right?
Yeah, I think I've been lucky. The last 5 seasons I've worked on shows with no commercials, so it's looser. You're afforded the opportunity to have a structure that is maybe a little more unconventional. Or if you go 59 minutes or even an hour and 2, it's okay. Or if you go 48, there's length restrictions.
How do you test your structure to make sure that you're holding the interest at the half hour and all? I mean, what do you think about that? Do you think about like in the middle of the story, is there a surprise or is there something interesting?
You
don't think
taste
about
it and
that.
you know if it's good. It can be a highly unconventional way of telling
There's no
story.
real template for that for the
Not
For the
not
structure
in
of
my
the show.
experience. Not on the 2
Not
shows
on
I
the-
worked on
not on the
with
cable
But
show.
notice like on Mad Men, which is my absolute
Yeah.
favorite show now, like the commercials just sort of get thrown in, like they don't really go towards act breaks even on that. Like it's almost like he's writing it like it's an HBO show, and then the commercial will just sort of come in
Right, it
like
just goes
after a scene. It's
That's
like,
right. They don't make any effort at the
No.
end of an act to do any kind of punctuation or anything like that.
Because I think ultimately people are going to watch these on DVDs and
DVD,
stuff,
yeah. That's
or
right.
on iTunes, whatever, and you skip past the commercial.
And I like that definition of it as punctuation because it is a sort of rhythm
Yeah.
that starts happening. Tom, I know you had your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question about writing spec scripts. I've been told that if you want to work in TV, you have to write a spec of an existing TV show. And so I was wondering how much that is true, if that would work for you as well. And I specifically the shows I'm drawn to writing for are the cable, the art shows, or some network shows are art. How, every time I sit down to write a spec show, I'm outdated. You know, how do you write a spec script for a show that is always in art? Where do you place your story when you're trying to write it?
About spec scripts, I would say, an agent who, the agent is the one who knows where all the jobs are and who's looking for what. So that, the agent wants as many things in the arsenal as possible. So if an agent calls a showrunner and says, so you're looking for a writer, what do you want to see? The showrunner can say, well, I want to see a spec of, a show very similar to mine.
That's
or I want to see totally original material. Or I want to see, it could be, so I want to see their stage play. I want to see their fiction, whatever, and the agent is going to want, a spec of, something a little more procedural so that they can go and talk to the cold case people, something a little more character based so they can talk to the Mad Men people, something original because, someone may ask for that. So in that case, yes, it is helpful to have a spec because the agent can't predict what the showrunner is going to ask for when they're reading scripts.
I think you can't worry about too much about the story because you're probably not going to write a spec for the show.
Right.
Like you do not want to write, like if you wanted to get a job on True Blood, you would not want to write a True Blood spec. You would want to write Sons of Anarchy or something like that because that's just the way it is. That you want to write
Legally,
for that
you actually
show.
can't.
Legally as well.
Can't read it.
But also you have much more scrutiny. If you're writing a spec for the show that
People know it.
people spend all day working on that show, they're going to say, well, that's not how this guy writes, or talks. So I think you just have to sort of write your best story and not worry too much about it.
In terms of being out of date, a lot of people write a new spec every year.
Yeah.
So if you so because the shows change all the time, and they also, as Alex was saying, you want to have two different kinds of samples, and it's very useful if you wrote a spec pilot. If you wrote a show that was something that you were interested in, then that shows your voice, your tone, your natural sort of world that you're drawn to. And I would just put a caution out there about people. Many people will say they want to read plays, and everybody thinks they can read plays, but a lot of people can't. A lot of people don't get it, because it's as you were saying that they're literal. And one guy, now a very good friend of mine, I've worked with him very much, David Zucker at Ridley Scott's company, and he goes to see plays in New York and stuff, and he wanted to read one of my plays. I gave him a play, gave him Need Desires the Dirt, which is a pretty straight play. He started calling me an experimental playwright after. It's like, well, I'm not going to show him my experimental plays. He started introducing me as experimental playwright, and I was like, no, not really. But and so he's a very sophisticated reader, but doesn't go to a lot of strange plays. Goes to much more traditional theater. And so you have to be a little bit careful if you're a playwright and people say that they want to read your work. Just keep in mind that in television people are literal. And, if you write a very whacked out play, they're going to think, oh, he needs to be on a comedy. And instead of, he could write a drama,
I wouldn't get too worried about it being out of date unless it clearly, it shows that you wrote it 10 years ago.
Yes.
And you're like, okay, well, why are you showing me something that you wrote 10 years ago? If it's not quite up to the minute in the storyline,
people are
that
going
can
to
be
forgive
forgiven.
that. People
Yeah.
are going to forgive that.
Yeah.
But you also want to write a show that's kind of in the zeitgeist. You don't want to write a show that is too old or off the air, something like that, because that just
Or
shows.
a show that's respected that people think is good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
We had a question over here, Nicole, and then over there, Sue. So Nicole?
This is for Alexander. You guys mentioned earlier about helpful suggestions from the actors about the characters' dialogue and things like that. And I wanted to know more about the research that goes into True Blood's characters because, we can't do much about the accents that the actors have. Sometimes there are certain Southern colloquialisms that are on point. I'm from the South, and I went to school in New Orleans, and I know a lot of Louisiana, so I know I feel comfortable with most of the dialogue that's there. And there are sometimes I'm just like, it breaks on my ears, no offense, but it's like that wouldn't be something that they would say. So how do you let the characters or the actors who may be from that area or who have more experience, I guess
That one is pretty much on our show. It's pretty much on the writers. I think because Alan commands so much respect, there's very little going off script on our show, which is very unusual. They're very, very respectful of the script. So if something rings off your ear a little funny, it's not the actors, it's the writers. And the last line of defense is Alan, who's from Marietta, Georgia. But the other thing I've discovered is that the South is a very big place and a very diverse place, and things from one parish in Louisiana, people say things a certain way that is completely different from another parish in Louisiana. So some words, and certainly New Orleans, very different, from northern Louisiana where the show is set. So we would have, because we have a few Louisianans one in our cast and several in our crew, who have completely different opinions sometimes about whether you say route or route, or whether you say it isn't clear cut. So sometimes if something hits you, you're funny. There's another Southerner right next to you who it doesn't. So I don't think we can ever totally win.
Sue?
I kind of had a couple of questions. I don't know if they're related or not, but I think one of the first things I heard before I even applied to this program was I was talking to a playwright and a professor actually he was telling me that the best writers now are in television, and I'm not actually a television writer or a playwright, so I'm a fiction writer, but I'm just wondering, when you see that Chase commercial that says, we have as many ATMs as unsold screenplays. I know that TV writing is also different from screenplays, but so my question is that you kind of all said that you stumbled into it, but does it really, do you think, being in this industry, does depend on the really good writing? Or is it like a mixture of, is it all pure luck? Or would you say the people that you work with, the writers, and then that's also kind of related to the end product. A lot of questions touched upon this, but I think as writers, one of the things writers fear the most, I fear the most, is novel writing is like you write it down and nobody's going to, you have an answer, nobody's going to tell you, and you're not going to say, that's not what I wrote, that's totally not what I meant, but maybe, I know that in movies, they say that writers are the bottom of the ladder, and so as TV writers, how does your original work translate onto the screen and how are you satisfied with that result? And also, so it's like twofold, that question, and then the question about what separates all the writers who want to sell their stuff, but
Well, to your first question, I'd say that luck does sometimes play a part maybe in getting you in the door or getting your first job. So, but then you've got to have the goods or you're not, you won't stick around. So, because especially now, I'd say like budgets are lower. In sitcom, there used to be room for a lot of writers on staff would be like the star's friend who used to be a stand-up with him, and would make everybody laugh. Wouldn't do anything. Those people aren't around anymore. They're called room guys, and they pitch jokes that are ridiculous and too dirty to get on the air, and everybody laughs. And it's like, okay, now we do the work. There isn't much room for those people anymore. So, it certainly is. There's a lot of serendipity. There's a lot of sort of, just really briefly, one of the first shows I worked on was a sitcom. My first sitcom job was a show called Homeboys in Outer Space that was on the UPN network that is still regarded as the punchline for worst show of all time. And Anything Weekly still says, well, it's not Homeboys in Outer Space, whatever. But it was really fun, and I met a lot of people who, a lot of guys who were great writers on there, they didn't create the show, they were hired on it. And two of the guys who worked on that show were people who would come from The Simpsons, and one of them, Al Jean, since we're back to The Simpsons, and I worked with other things, but he eventually hired me to go back to The Simpsons. So that part is luck, but then you'll have, if you're talented, you will stick around and you will continue to work. And if you're not, if people aren't, then I don't think they're not going to make it. So that's how to answer the first part of your question. And the other part is also about collaboration and sort of being able to being willing to sort of see what your vision will inevitably change based on the whims of other people, be okay with that too. But, especially in the comedy world, you're rewritten constantly, and you sort of have to be okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to honor the show you're on, and so you have to sort of be okay with fitting into that tone and that template and writing for those characters. And I think that's why most writers that I know want to get their own show on the air. I mean, that's the goal. That's what people want, and so that would be more satisfying to write something that's a spec pilot, or that's a pilot that you pitch and that gets picked up, and something that you so that that would be more satisfying. But that's an even smaller target to hit, and it's already a pretty small target just to have these jobs, You're lucky, and so for me, I find I try to take the satisfaction in doing a good job for the show that I'm on, and then have other things that I write. So I write my plays, and I'm working on other things, So I try to find my personal satisfaction writing what I really need to write or to explore as a writer. Because for me, I mean, it's kind of religion. It's like that's how I understand my life, is by writing about something and exploring it that way. And I can't do that kind of writing really for television. It's a different skill set, and it's a different satisfaction level. And it's really great. I mean, I've spent my whole life going, you could be, you could sort of be a Zen plumber and have a great life. And then I suddenly, like a couple months ago, I was going, well, you could be a Zen TV writer and have a great life. I can just sort of accept and stop trying to turn this into something that it's not, and accept it for what it is and what it can offer, and then, get this other thing somewhere else.
I think any sort of performative form of storytelling is going to be a collaboration with other people, and you just sort of have to sign yourself over. Even if it's a stage play, it's through the interpretation of a director to actors and designers still. So, you kind of understand that it's not going to be exactly what you thought. Maybe it could be even a little better.
It could be better, yes.
And I think that's part of the temperament of being someone who writes for actors and for performance, is that you give yourself over to the group mind. We have time for a couple of more questions. Yes.
My name is Tisha.
Hi, Tisha.
I'm wondering if you can, I think you touched on it teensy weensy bit here and there, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the social aspect of the writer's room. I've heard so many things. I've heard that if you are not good with groups, then you should consider writing movies. I've heard that if you are good with people, and then each writer's room has their own culture that you maybe TV writing is for you, but that each writer's room has its own personality. And then it was interesting because you said there is no writer's room for you.
There's not on this show.
Yeah.
Well, if you spend all day together, you spend upwards of sometimes 12 or 13 hours a day in a room with, say, 7 or 8 other people. It really helps that you all get along together and you're collaborating, and that you're sort of all working towards making the show better, as well as, you want your own self to get out there. But yeah, so to be social, to have a collaborative spirit, to not get too upset if something that you pitch doesn't get in, this will all help you prosper in your career working in TV and writers' rooms, because there's not, unless let's say if you're the showrunner and you run things, you can do whatever you want. But if you're on the staff, your job is to sort of help the show get along and make things happen. And then it comes to a point too when it's time, like, you want to go home. So if you're that guy who's like goofing around and doing this thing and I'm drinking this way and the water goes whatever, doing stupid jokes at midnight, you're really mad at that guy. All you want that guy to. And you don't care who gets the joke, who gets the line, and just somebody get it in so you can go home. So the writers' rooms are, it's a really amazing place where when that door closes, you're in this crazy place where you can say things that you could not say out in the real world, and come up with jokes that would scandalize people, and it's just accepted, and it's also accepted a way to sort of foster creativity and to be able to come up with something.
Well, I think that's the key, is that can you be creative in a group?
Yeah.
Is can you, and the sort of the biochemistry of each writer's room, the alchemy of each writer's room is different. And that's why sometimes people will not last,
Yeah.
But I don't think it automatically means that if, for example, you're shy, you shouldn't be a TV writer. Or if you, I don't think it means anything like that, because the real question is, does this group work together to create something? And so you could be, I've been in rooms where people are very, very, very quiet for a long time. And then they've been listening and paying attention and being part of the whole thing, and then they'll come in with, something that's incredibly valuable. And then there's another person who's a real talker. So I don't think it requires any particular kind of personality, but, it requires getting along with people in a way that is creative. It's not just getting along with people, because you can just get along with people and get nothing done.
That's right.
Or get something boring done. So you have to be able to sort of create together, and whatever that means, and that means a balance in the room. It means that, not everybody needs to be outgoing and extroverted and all of that.
One thing I'll say really quickly too, that I felt like, and then again I sort of stumbled into it, but the training I had in improv theater was huge, because that's all about being part of a group where you're working together to create something that wasn't there before, and it's all about trusting the other person and going with what they're going with and not denying it, and or not saying like, oh, my idea is better than yours, just going with it. So take improv class.
To take off that idea, I think theater is the same way. You're making something as a group, and so you have this kind of team mentality about pulling together and going, and so I think maybe that's part of why playwrights do well in writers' rooms.
I actually think the closest analog, and maybe the best possible experience, is something you've been doing probably for the past couple of years, is creative writing workshops. Because it gives you training on how to writers talking to writers about writing. And if you, and you've probably been in workshops that are miserable situations, and some that are really fruitful, and being able to navigate your way through both of those is equally good training. But knowing what to say that is constructive as opposed to soul crushing is an important thing. And also knowing how to interpret what someone is saying if they don't know exactly how to put it into words, but knowing what the intent of that note or that suggestion is. That's as much like what being in a writer's room is like. So in a sense, you probably know already.
Because then you're creating something that neither one of you would have created separately,
And it's a sort of laboratory where you go in and you have an idea of something, but, it's the atmosphere of the room can change it just by the apprehension. And that's something that we do try to do in this program, is have a shared critical vocabulary, but also that everyone is bringing their own creative associations to the table.
A creative writing workshop, much longer with snacks.
and you get paid for it. You get paid for it. So, well, on that note, we have to wrap up, but we will have a reception, and I just want to thank
you
all
guys
of you for being here.
Thank you. It was fun.
That was fun, yeah.
That was
Fun.